we acknowledge, Lord, that we are one in the Spirit. We thank you, Father, for your presence here amongst us, that you will continue to bind us, to equip us, to grow us. We ask, Lord, that you would bless this meeting that we have, that you be with each one of us, and especially Robert, our guest speaker, and we ask, Lord, that you would pour into him your wisdom, and that he would be able to just minister to him. And thank you for the fellowship of believers that we have here from all sorts of different demographics and geographies, but yet we are one of the body, and we thank you, Lord, for that. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Bill.
Okay, so let's see. So this is our quarterly guest speaker platform. We at Fusion, our purpose is to essentially provide a platform for us to connect marketplace leaders like each one of you. It is, we come together as in our local churches on Sunday, but it's during the rest of the week that we have the world before us, the marketplace, and that is what's represented by each one of us as the church in action in the marketplace. So the purpose of Fusion, Rebecca, are you controlling the slides? Okay, yeah, let's go to the next one here. All right, so our slogan is more faith in business, which is essentially, we want Christ and the church to be represented in the marketplace. And we recognize that when we're out there, each one of our work areas, our people that we touch, those are our ministry fields. And our purpose is to connect and equip marketplace believers, professionals throughout the world, and to help encourage them in the ministries that they each have within their marketplace. We are a 501c3 organization. We're a nonprofit, but yeah, we're here essentially to be an augment to the church to help connect people. So the platform that we have is from a geographic perspective, we have groups and cohorts that meet on a monthly basis. We have, in Southern California, we have one based in Irvine, Anaheim, LA, Glendale. We recently started one in the San Francisco Bay Area. We have one in San Diego. So those are, this is how we started. We started with actual physical groups coming together, encourage each other in equipping, and not just in helping each other from a personal perspective, a spiritual perspective, but also from a business perspective. The ability for us to refer business to each other is one of the components of who we are. And we recognize that by doing this, we stimulate God's economy, and we help the church flourish in that perspective. And to register for any of these, these are all virtual at this point. So you go to our website and be able to register there. Another part of our platform is not demographic oriented, but it's pretty much open globally. We have people piping in from all over the country. We have some folks in different continents that pipe into this with the purpose of coming together, bringing people together who are believers to meet, to foster relationships and to encourage each other. So once a quarter, we have this virtual round robin networking for 1 solid hour. You will be put into different groups, like many of you were put in earlier in the beginning part of this meeting, to meet and just get to know other believers in the marketplace. And we will rotate you to between 3 and 4 different groups, so it'll give you a chance to really encounter and begin to build a relationship with other believers. And again, these are free events. We have emails that they'll go out as invites. Also, with our quarterly speaker series, Robert Yee speaking today. Tentatively, we have Dr. Ed Silvoso, who's a longtime evangelist. He's founder and president of an organization called Harvest Evangelism that's based up in San Jose. But they have an international ministry. He also heads up a ministry called International Transformation Network, which connects marketplace believers and the church together to be able to serve the world. His latest book, Ecclesia: Rediscovering God's Instrument for Global Transformation. I read this and it was personally transforming for me. It just talks about God's purpose. We're out there in the marketplace. What is the end game? What is this all about? In the Matthew, the Great Commission, we're called to make disciples of all nations. How do we do that? How do we do that as individuals, as a church? So that's, he's tentatively scheduled for June. I actually have a conversation with him next week to try to confirm that. And then in the third quarter, in September, we have Dr. Josh Packer, PhD. Actually, I think he's in our audience today. So welcome, Josh. Great that you can make it. Josh is Executive Director of Springtide Research, Christian organization. Josh is a sociologist. And so he does studies. He's written a book called Church Refugees, which I think is a must read for all pastors. Last year, his organization put forth a study called The State of Religion in Young People in 2020, which is really a study of Gen Z, which is the next generation. Personally, when I look at the church today and the state that it's in, I have a lot of hope for the next generation. But the millennials, Gen Zs is really where our future is at. So his study has a lot of great insight into what's going on with them and how we as the elder generations could really connect and mentor and help them in developing the church in the future. His group's also working on a study on faith and work, which I'm really looking forward to. So Josh has graciously accepted to speak for the third quarter. So looking forward to that. And so what I'd like to do at this point is to give a quick intro for Robert Yee. Robert Yee, good friend. He's also on the Fusion Board of Directors. He's president, COO of Westfall Gold. Westfall Gold is an organization that does high-level fundraising for large nonprofits. They do an outstanding job there. He's been managing partner of investments business firm called 10 Talents Partners. Prior to that, he was COO General Counsel for Evangelical Christian Credit Union, which was, at least a number of years back, the largest lender for churches in the nation. He's also been an adjunct professor over at Biola. He hails from UC Berkeley, which makes him great in my book, since I went to UC Berkeley as well. He also went to Loyola Law School, MBA in Strategic Management, and he serves on a number of different boards, including the Christian Leadership Alliance. And the talk that he gives today, he actually gave at their national conference, and it was one of the more well-attended, highly rated talks. International Sanctuary that does a lot of great work in terms of ministering internationally in the area of human trafficking, and then this organization, Town and Country. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Robert Yee.
Thank you so much, Bill. And Jane, I see your applause. Thank you. I appreciate that. And it is, it's really great for me to be here and have an opportunity to share with you all today, not only because I like the topic, but this is a special organization to me. I've been a Fusion member since the beginning, and Bill's vision to see the community of faith-based, Christian, Christ-centered business owners and leaders and coming together to minister to the business world is hugely important. And I know that Bill has created something special here. It's also fun for me because I see a number of folks that I know from my time in Orange County in California. Grew up in Orange County and moved out to Atlanta several years ago. So I'm still getting used to the weather and the larger bugs that we have here in the South. It's a big difference, but anyway, like I said, a real joy to be here, and hopefully that means that you all will be patient with me as I stumble through this presentation today. Some of you know that I have two daughters. My older one is a sophomore in high school, if you can believe that. Some of you who've known her since she was a little one, and my younger one is an 8th grader, which is fun having two teenage girls. I'm learning. God is testing my patience certainly through that. But earlier this month, I was taking my 8th grader, Christina, to school, and we were listening to the news and heard that Elon Musk's SpaceX had a prototype rocket that exploded upon landing. And if you follow any of that, that was the 3rd consecutive explosion of a SpaceX rocket. And so Christina, as we heard this, she responded in her great way. Well, it seems like that's not good news for a rocket ship company, you know. Well, I am no Elon Musk level visionary for sure, but I have a passion for strategy. I have a passion for helping organizations understand what's happening in the future and adjusting, making plans to achieve a vision in the context of that. And that really is the first step in building a strategic plan, right? Is understanding your external environment and trying to figure out where those trends are headed so that you can make adjustments to what you're doing today. And that probably is how I would describe what a mega trend is, right? It is those global forces that shape the future. And so today I'm going to talk through what I see as probably the 5 most important global forces out there. And we'll spend some time together talking about what that means for your organizations, and both in the business world and in the ministry world. The first thing I note here before we dive in is over the next 30 to 40 minutes or so, I'm going to go over a lot of content. This is not the type of presentation like I might do on some Sundays where I doze off or think about other things in the midst of a sermon. There's not space for that today. So there's a lot of information, a lot of data that I'll be going over. I do think you'll find a lot of that valuable in the context of this topic. But I would really encourage you to open or print out the handout. I know Rebecca had pushed that out to everybody who registered by email. And I think she's going to put that in the chat box as well here. But I've made available the handout in Microsoft Word format so that you can edit it and take notes along the way. So I'd really encourage you to open that up and just jot notes along the way, because you're going to want to start thinking about what are these mega trends that you serve. We are in a really interesting time as a global community, right? Coming out of let's pray that we are all coming out of the COVID crisis. And in the context of that, I think back to another crisis that the Bible shares with us, and that is the Great Famine that Joseph led Egypt and that world at the time through. If you remember in that context, right, God had revealed to Joseph and to Pharaoh what was going to happen over the next 14-year period, right? That there would be a period of plenty, and then there would be a period of 7 years of famine. And with that view of the future in mind, Joseph, through his giftedness and experience and wisdom, and really through seeking God's leading, developed a plan to take the nation through this 14-year period. And as we think about the extraordinary time, this moment in time that we're in history, we've been fighting the worst pandemic we've ever seen. Certainly we've ever seen as a community, the worst pandemic in modern history. our organizations have adapted, right? We've changed, sometimes painfully we've changed, and sometimes with extraordinary results. I was talking with a anti-trafficking organization called the Human Trafficking Institute. They do fantastic work training up people who are on the front line, law enforcement, the policemen, the judges, the prosecutors, around how to identify and prosecute offenders, traffickers. And their whole model before COVID was having in-person training, taking experts and training people in law enforcement around the world, and doing that all in person. And then when COVID hit, they just couldn't do that anymore. That wasn't an option anymore. And so they adapted, and one of their trainers decided to create a WhatsApp group and created a group of law enforcement in his region, just so that people could exchange questions, and he could give tips and coach people and encourage people just through WhatsApp. And you know what? They saw their conviction rate increase 100-fold. So God is doing extraordinary things through our community when we can think creatively through this situation. But the reality is, we are going to come out of this crisis changed. We're going to have new skills and competencies. We're going to have different resources, and our teams are going to be transformed. Our constituents are going to change. So my encouragement to you at the beginning of this conversation is that this is the time to start rethinking your strategy for your organization. This is the time, as we're coming out of the COVID crisis, to say, where are we headed as a global community? Where are we headed as a country? Where are we headed as a community? And what are we going to do to thrive in this new environment? So with that in mind, the focus for my talk today are on long-term trends. If you ask me what's going to happen in the stock market this year, I'm going to say I don't know. That's not my focus today. What I want to do is start revealing what the world could look like by 2030. What are the trends that are occurring today across these 5 factors that will define the world in 2030? And with that glimpse, with that understanding of the future, what are the choices we make today to start adapting our organizations for the future? So as Rebecca mentioned at the beginning of our talk, the 5 megatrends, the areas that we'll be covering today, are around global economics, technology, labor, demographics, and urbanization. So strap in. Like I said, this is not drinking from the fire hose. This is a tidal wave that's coming at you, because each one of these topics, is a multi-week course. And so I've really tried to encapsulate the most salient details for you today. So let's get going. The first megatrend is this, around the global economy. The global economy will become increasingly diverse, driven by the purchasing power of China, India, and other developing economies. Now, as I break down sort of this trend, I want to present 2 different views of the economic strength of organizations. If you recall back to your study of economics years ago, for some, decades ago for me, you may remember that GDP, the gross domestic product of a country, can be defined in real dollars, US dollars in the case that we'll talk about today, or can be defined by purchasing power parity. It is an adjustment that economists use to factor in sort of the cost of living and be able to compare the standard of living across countries based on gross domestic product. I'll also note at this point, I am not an expert in any of these topics. I am what I would call an enthusiastic amateur. So I'm sure there are folks on the call today that have great deals of expertise in any one of these areas. And we'll have a Q&A session later, and I'd welcome your comments and perspectives. But what I want to do is share with you these 2 different views of where global economies, where the economies of different countries could head. First, with a purchasing power parity view, the PPP view, and that really again speaks to what the standard of living looks like within countries. And then we'll talk about the real view, or the nominal view, of GDP. So by 2030, what will be the largest economies in the world when you consider purchasing power parity? The first country will not be a surprise to most folks, and that will be China. China will, in fact, already has on a PPP basis, usurped the US as the world's leading economy, right? And we'll again talk about real dollars in a moment, but there's by far, by 2030, China will be the #1 economy. This data and these projections were prepared by Standard Chartered Bank, and this was done before the COVID pandemic. I don't think the trends have changed. The numbers may have changed, but the trends are still quite relevant. What may be surprising to you is a country that comes in second position, and it's not the United States. It is India. That India will grow to become the second largest economy in the world on a purchasing power parity basis. And the reason for that largely is not just their rapid growth in real GDP, but because of the standard of living, because of the cost of living adjustment, right? And so cost of living certainly will increase in India, but when you compare India's cost of living to the United States or even China, it's significantly higher. The other thing to consider is that both China and India have about 1.4 billion people today. That's 4 times larger than the United States. So just from a population perspective, the trajectory of growth in GDP and the economic power of these countries, again, is likely to overtake the US by 2030. One thing I'd note here is, I think about this shift. The US has been at the top of this chart for so long, for decades, really almost 100 years. And so you think back, what happened 100 years ago? It's when the US overtook the UK in terms of GDP. And so we've enjoyed this amazing period of expansion and growth in our economy, but this shift in the global economy is not only going to happen for certain, but it's one that we've been through as a world before. The other thing that I'd also point out is that in addition to China and India, there are a number of emerging economies that will continue to grow rapidly. And what that means is we'll see a continued decentralization of global financial power. So what we're going to see is sort of developing economies today, like Indonesia, Turkey, Brazil, and Egypt, are going to leapfrog over the more developed nations like Japan, Germany, the UK, in terms of GDP, again, on a purchasing power parity basis. So what does this all mean? The growth of China and India and other developing nations in GDP, again, on a PPP basis, can really be summed up in 2 words, and that is discretionary income. Over the next decade, there's going to be a massive increase in the global middle class. So the UN predicts that by 2030, the world population of that 2/3 of the world population will be categorized as middle class or rich. And so you think about growing from 3.6 billion in this category to 5.3 billion, that has huge implications for consumer spending and also charitable giving. So with that in mind, I guess this is the first impact statement I want you to consider for your organization. If discretionary income substantially increases with the growth of the middle and upper class, what does that mean for your business? Primarily in terms of your opportunities overseas. So one example I'd point out in this, as I was doing some research, is I saw my friend Mandy earlier today, and her great organization, the Dale Carnegie Training Group. They have offices, they're certainly well known, they got their start in the US, but they have offices that are just launching now in India and China. Mandy, I'm saying just launching. I don't know how long you've been actually doing that, but I saw that there are offices that are now launching in those areas. And so, when we think about how we serve consumers, how we reach consumers in developing worlds, we primarily go to like, consumer products or food or whatnot, electronics. But I think there's a great opportunity for people who are providing consulting or training around soft skills or leadership development to take what we know in the US and export that into developing economies. I think there's going to be a huge, huge thirst for that over the next decade. For ministries that are serving organizations around the world, I think you need to start thinking about how to build a fundraising appeal, how to build your donor development programs overseas. We've long looked toward the US and other first world countries as funding sources for ministry work overseas. And now what we're going to need to start thinking about is how do we create ecosystems within those countries where they're funding their own ministry work. So now that we've talked about GDP from a purchasing power parity basis, I do want to touch on an economic perspective from a real dollar basis. And what that means is, how do countries compare to one another in terms of their economic strength? And this really speaks to the comparative influence that countries have on the world stage. And so what I'm sharing with you now is a recent projection by the International Monetary Fund on the top countries that they're projecting in terms of GDP over the next 5 years. What you'll see here are those changes over the next 5-year period. So this is number one, a perspective on real dollars. So you're comparing like to like. And number two, this was prepared after the COVID pandemic began. So the IMF had made some adjustments with respect to the impact of COVID on the world economy. And so you'll see all throughout real positive growth, especially among first world countries. There's a consistent growth across developed economies. But I've highlighted two countries, certainly China and India, and you'll see that their growth projections, even on a real dollar basis, are significantly higher than other countries. And so what that means, again, over time, over the next 10 years, we're certainly going to see China move up to the top. We probably will see India reach that third or fourth level in terms of actual GDP over the next 10 years. So the private equity firm BlackRock has called this trend out even years ago. They said that China is already on the path to usurp the US as the world's leading superpower. And when it does, the political agenda, global trade, and spheres of influence will likely move towards Beijing from Washington. Now, I want to share with you, I'm not fatalistic about the US's prospects at all. I'm not saying that the US is going to be irrelevant in 2030. That's definitely not true. We've got a stable capital market. We've got robust institutions of higher education, great leadership and innovation. So we're absolutely going to be able to still be relevant and influential in 10 years. But that said, I think one of the impacts that we need to think about is that global transactions, whether they're business transactions or fundraising transactions or whatever they are, but global engagement, it's going to reflect a more multinational culture. It's not going to be defined by what we view as norms in sort of the Western countries. And so my question for you all is, what are you going to do over the next 10 years to help your teams engage in a multinational global environment, right? And really, isn't that what Paul advocated in 1 Corinthians? In 1 Corinthians 9, verse 21, Paul said, "To those outside the law, I become as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside of the law." And so my advice for you all, my admonition for all of us as believers, whether we're in the marketplace and business or in a traditional ministry, is what are we doing to engage with folks outside of our walls to win them to Christ. So here's a summary of this megatrend and the impact. And what I want to do is just give you 10 seconds, 15 seconds or so. If you take out your notes or the handout and reflect on this megatrend and the impact. So my question for you is, what if this megatrend becomes true, if these impacts are seen over the next 10 years, then what implications does that have for your organization? And what should you do today in light of it? So let me just give you 10 seconds or so to reflect on that. And as Rebecca noted in the chat, we'll make these slides available to you after the presentation. The next trend, megatrend, is around technology. Over the next 10 years, what we're going to see is that artificial intelligence will lead a convergence of technological innovation that delivers a more personalized and meaningful experience. We could spend hours and days and months talking about the impact of technology. But what I want to do is paint a really big picture here. First of all, consider this quote from the CEO of Alphabet, the parent company of Google, that artificial intelligence is one of the most profound things we're working on as humanity. And he would say that it is more profound than fire or electricity. And that might seem like a very lofty statement. But what I want to point out is that when we talk about artificial intelligence, it's important to keep two types of artificial intelligence in mind. The first type is what's called artificial narrow intelligence. And that is the creation of machines that are programmed to complete a specific task. And it could be a complex task for sure, but machines are not mimicking human intelligence in this context, but they're simulating human behavior or a set of behaviors based on a narrow range of parameters. So Siri and Alexa are great examples of this artificial narrow intelligence. And frankly, it's the only type of AI that's been realized to date. This next level of artificial intelligence is what's called artificial general intelligence. And if you're in the technology world, there's a lot of excitement about what this is and what this could mean. So artificial general intelligence occurs when a machine is independently able to learn and apply human-like intelligence. The best model for structuring AI of this nature is the human brain, and to create a neural network that is works like the human brain. And we are, as a world, nowhere near this technology yet. It is just far beyond our capability today. A few years ago, I think it was like the third or fourth most powerful supercomputer in the world ran a program to simulate a neural activity, and 1 second of neural activity took 40 minutes to process. So it's going to be some time before this becomes a reality. It's not going to happen by 2030. Probably will take 100 years or more. But the impact of this is that breakthroughs in the development of artificial general intelligence will have huge, huge impact on our daily lives. So with that in mind, I want to share with you a perspective from McKinsey & Company. They have a term that they've used called the combinatorial technology explosion. And what they mean by that is the acceleration and exponential growth of disruptive innovation from the combination of seemingly disparate inventions and disciplines. We often focus on breakthroughs in any single technology. And what McKinsey talks about is what we'll continue to see is the growth of technology and the impact of technology because of the combination of disparate technologies around the ecosystem that we're in. And so I want to share with you just like some of the most important advances in technology that are going to happen. One of these is the optimization of the cloud versus edge technology. So what that means is that, you know, our phones, our laptops, our devices that we are closest with have incredible processing power. Instead of shifting all of that to the cloud, optimizing the relationship between the cloud and those technologies that are closest to us that have significant processing power. Bandwidth. Many of you have heard the significant increase in bandwidth that will occur wirelessly as 5G is adopted around the world. Connectivity of devices over the next 10 years, experts are expecting that we will grow from about 20 billion connected machines today to 500 billion by 2030. This significant growth in the number of connected devices is going to change how we interact with the world. You can see some others here. The other one that I want to point out, though, is really interesting to me is the rapid growth of 3D printing. So I have my, I don't have my Star Trek mug near me anymore, but you remember the replicators from Star Trek, right? Like that's becoming a reality. And think about the massive implications of that. When you don't have to go anywhere to create what you want, you just go to your 3D printer and print out what you need. The implications for culture and society and how we engage with the things around us are huge. So I want to share with you this, what I think is an extraordinary advance in artificial intelligence and technology. And that is the work that IBM is doing in this area and called Project Debater. For the last few years, the IBM research team has been developing a computer that is capable of engaging in a live debate with a person. And so if you go to this link, if you just search up Project Debater and IBM, you'll find the page. They have a YouTube clip of this actual live debate. And both the machine, which you see on the left here, and the gentleman on the right is a world champion debater. We're given the same topic and given the same amount of time.
Are you done?
And they, in that moment, both created opening statements. They created a rebuttal and a closing statement. And what was fascinating is the machine was not only on topic, on point, and made intelligent arguments, but was it winsome as well, and fun to listen to. So my point is this: you think about the amazing technological advancement that needed to occur in order for this machine to be able to do this. The auditory processing, understanding what the human was saying, being able to research a wide variety of sources and construct not just an intelligent argument, but a winning argument. She didn't win the debate, but a winning argument in this context. I just think it's a stunning, stunning achievement in artificial intelligence. At the end of the day, you know, advances in technology over the next 10 years are going to obviously impact every aspect of our world. So what does this mean for us? Number one, I think in our context, both in business and ministry, computer systems will create and manage unique interactions with customers and constituents that deepen the bond between them and the organization. The friend of mine, Dave Raley, who is an executive vice president with a nonprofit marketing organization called Masterworks. He and they have been on the forefront of this question of technology and fundraising in the nonprofit world. And he says that artificial intelligence is on the cusp of being able to deliver the right message. So constructing the right message, delivering it at the right time to the right person through the right channel. You know, all of that are things that we're doing today as humans. And at some point in the future, in the near future, an AI-enabled machine will be able to do all of that for us. The second impact that I want to talk about in the context of technology, and it's a little bit counterintuitive, is that I believe high value relationships are going to be even more reliant on in-person engagement, even though face-to-face meetings are going to be harder to secure. And what I mean by that is, um, in the new world, everything we do, everything in touch, every interaction we have is going to be enabled by technology at some level. And we all are feeling right? I mean, in the last year with COVID, with all the Zoom meetings that we've had and all the interactions we've had electronically, we as humans crave that in-person interaction. And I think that will be really become even more evident over the next 10 years as computers begin to drive and define those interactions that we have. There was some research done by professors at Cornell University. This was before the pandemic, but they had concluded that real, sort of offline, in-person experiences are key to personal fulfillment. That in-person experiences create more lasting happiness because they tend to be more positive, become more meaningful as part of one's identity, and they do more to foster social relationships. So again, my encouragement to you all is, how do we create more in-person experiences? They're going to be harder to get because you're going to have a harder time tearing people away from their computers. But when you have those in-person experiences, how do you make them engaging and memorable for the people that you're serving? So with that in mind, again, here's a summary of the megatrend around technology. So reflect on this trend and the impact of this trend for a moment. What are the implications for you and your organizations with respect to technology? I'll just give you a few seconds to jot some notes down. One of the areas that will be significantly impacted by technology, of course, is labor. And the mega trend I'd highlight in this area is that traditional jobs are going to give way to the gig economy, where the majority of people work as freelancers and not employees. So let's take a step back and understand the impact that computers and technology are going to have on labor. Today, even right now, 50% of current work activities can be automated. McKinsey & Company predicts that by 2030, 15 to 20% of today's workers will be displaced or could be displaced by advancements in technology. The implication for all of us to think about is, how do we serve those whose jobs are at risk of being lost or changed significantly because of advancements in technology? In the business world, this is a tricky dance, right? As a leader of a business, you want to adopt those technologies that make you more efficient as an organization. And yet I believe we have a responsibility to those workers today to help them transition through this period so that they are ready to provide value to the organization in the new reality. I think for churches, rescue missions, and social service organizations, it's going to be a huge issue as they need to figure out how to effectively deliver job training and transition services to a huge population that may be displaced by technology. I think one of the realities of that for me is that traditional sort of office jobs like mortgage origination or tax preparation, those we'll see continue to be automated over the next few years. I think we'll see, as an example, so take this example, this case as an example. We all know that automated cars are taking over, right? We see automation in that area advancing very quickly. And at some point in the future, governments will allow cars to be fully automated and have no need for human drivers. You think about the number of jobs that are impacted by that technology alone. 4 million jobs will be at risk when truck drivers and taxi drivers and shared ride services and buses are all automated by AI enabled drivers. But also you consider, if automated vehicles reduce the number of accidents on the road, then there's other jobs at risk too, right? Auto body shops and repair shops and paramedics. So that one technology alone could have a huge impact on the workforce. So the next, let me see, sorry, here we go. The next topic around labor I want to talk about is sort of the job landscape. Since the 2008 financial crisis, we've seen as a country a significant increase in the number of people pursuing freelance work. People that are going from one gig to the next instead of having a traditional job or traditional employment. So one of my favorite millennial terms is the term side hustle. Like, for me, we just used to call that a second job, but I guess side hustle is a lot cooler than that. But that's sort of reflective of the gig economy, right? And what McKinsey is estimating is that the gig economy is going to grow from about 25% participation to over 50% of all workers by the year 2030. On that note, just heard this morning that was an interesting news article about a shared ride service, and I don't remember which country it was, but in anticipation of changes, regulatory changes about work, they're moving to treating their drivers as employees and not as freelancers. So there's an interesting sort of backlash to this gig economy question that may be happening here over time. But I think the reality is, in the COVID pandemic, there are more and more people who are looking for sort of the a freelance type of job opportunities and more flexibility, which millennials crave. And so my question for all of us to consider is, how are you adapting your organizational design to take into account job opportunities for folks that are appealing to freelance workers, right? I think for almost all organizations over the next 10 years, we're going to have to figure out how to integrate freelance workers and part-time workers and project-to-project workers into our organizations and continue to deliver on the services and values that we deliver to our customers. And so here is a quick summary of the labor megatrend and the impact. And I apologize, I'm going over a little long, so I'm going to fly through the rest of these slides in the interest of time. Again, we'll have some Q&A time at the end to the extent you have questions. This probably is the most interesting megatrend for me. You all already know this. We've been talking about this a lot as a country, as a society, but as the global population of the next 10 years is going to grow increasingly older as fertility decreases and life expectancy increases. So by 2030, the UN expects that the global population will reach 8.5 billion people, up from 7.8 billion people today. The two factors that influence population are births and deaths, right? It is the rate of births per woman and life expectancy. Let me share with you the most important number that you've probably never heard of, and that is 2.1. 2.1 is a magic number at which 2.1 births per woman is a number at which a society sustains its population. If the fertility rate is above 2.1, a population grows. And if it's below 2.1, a population shrinks. So this is an absolutely critical number to demographics. And let me share with you a graph that represents that. This is the UN's projection. It's a historical graph and a projection of the fertility rate through the end of the century. So a couple of things I'll point out here is that, one, the birth rate, the fertility rate has dropped significantly since the 1950s. Around the world, the average birth rate was 5 children per woman. And today, around the world, the global fertility rate is half that. It's 2.5 births per woman. But look at what happens to that line over time, that it continues to grow, and that the UN is projecting in 1964, the global fertility rate will drop below 2.1. And what that means in the second half of the century is the world will no longer be growing our population. We're actually going to start shrinking as a population around the world. And again, you can think about the huge implications that has on the world when that happens. Here's another perspective in terms of the projected fertility rates around the world for different continents. And you'll see for most continents, it's around 1.8 in Northern America, 2.0 in China. But look at Africa. Africa's fertility rate by 2030 is projected still to be 3.8, significantly higher than the rest of the world. Okay, on the flip side of that, fertility is global life expectancy. And no surprise to any of you that global life expectancy is expected to continue to grow. Today, it's right about 73 years, and by 2030, it's expected to go up to about 74.5 years. So we'll continue to see as economies sort of advance, their advancements in health and human health services will increase the life expectancy around the world. So here's another perspective. So what is the projected life expectancy in 2030? Again, around the world, you see this consistent sort of somewhere between 75 and 81. But Africa, again, as a developing continent still, you'll see a significant increase in their projected life expectancy. Today, that is, I have it here. I don't have it right on me, but I think it's in the low 60s today, and that'll increase to 66, but it still has a ways to go in order to catch up with the rest of the world. One thing I'll note here, I don't talk a lot today about the differences between generations, but I thought this fact was really interesting, that we tend to believe and look at the millennial and Gen Z populations homogeneously across the world. But keep in mind that Gen Zers are not the same from country to country or continent to continent. That in developing markets, Gen Zers tend to be more socially conservative and trusting in business than their established market counterparts. So if you're working with international populations, especially the next generation, that's an interesting fact to keep in mind. Global population growth, again, the point here is that we're going to see a significant expansion in the population that is 65 and older over the next 10 years. And then as a percentage, younger populations are going to be shrinking as a whole. So 2 statements of impact here. Number 1, government and private organizations, businesses and nonprofits will need to figure out, how do we care for and engage an older population? How do we take the wisdom of an older generation and use that, especially in our context, to advance kingdom purposes? And this is a fact that many of you who are in the financial services are well aware of. we're going to see this significant transition in wealth over the next 25 years. Trillions of dollars are going to flow from boomers to Gen Xers and millennials. So it's something for us, again, to all think about. How do we, what are the opportunities for our businesses in the context of this transference of wealth? And again, in the interest of time, I apologize. I'm going to speed up here and hit our last topic, which is urbanization. So we're going to see over the next decade a continued rapid growth in urban populations. And this will create income opportunities for many, but also increase the challenges for the poor and vulnerable. By 2030, the UN is predicting that over 60% of the world's population will live in cities. We're going to continue to see that migration from rural areas to metropolitan areas. And so as cities expand, of course, for those of you that are in infrastructure or planning or construction, you're going to see significant opportunities for growth around the world. But my concern, and especially for folks that are in the nonprofit world, but even in the for-profit business world, that by 2030, 3 billion people are going to need adequate and affordable housing. That as people move into cities and they move into environments where the cost of living is higher, that you're going to have more and more people that don't have the income levels needed in order to afford a standard of living that's acceptable. And so the impact from my perspective is this: how do we as a community come alongside this growing population of poor and vulnerable people in cities around the world, that they're going to need greater levels of care, support, and hope. So with all that in mind, I congratulate you for enduring through this tidal wave of information. I hope that you found it at least a fractionally as interesting as I do, because I think this is really, really interesting content that is going to have an impact around the world. So with that in mind, Rebecca, I'm going to ask you for a time check here. What we'd like to do is give you an opportunity to go back into your breakout groups and spend a little bit of time reflecting on these mega trends. And do you agree or disagree with these trends? What impact will these trends have on your organization? And what are the things you could be doing today to benefit from the mega trends to come? So I know Rebecca is going to push us into breakout rooms. And
actually, Robert, in the interest of time, we want to be mindful of everybody's schedule. It's 1:18. So I'm thinking that we can just kind of go right into open Q&A at this point, and perhaps in the course of that Q&A, there could be some discussion. So we can just open up to anyone who'd like to be able to share or ask questions. I think that'd be better served, because when we go into the smaller groups, it's going to be a bit more challenging to really get through a meaningful discussion, and we still want to be able to have some Q&A.
Sure.
So towards that end, I'm going to suggest that if you have a question, you can either share it in chat, or you can just unmute and just ask it in this open group. I know that 1 o'clock, there was a witching hour for a number of different people that had to drop off, unfortunately, but I appreciate everybody sticking it out to this point who are still here. But yeah, let's open up to questions for Robert. I mean, there's some interesting data there that certainly makes you think. And there's implications certainly for each one of our futures, whether it be in terms of institutions that we're affiliated with, whether that be our church or the companies or the businesses or industries that we're affiliated with. I know that in some financial circles, the wealth transfer, trillions of dollars going to millennial Gen Z, that's birthed a lot of people in the area of transition planning, exit planning. And I know that that's a big topic for financial advisors, the whole aspect of technology. It's nice to hear that we won't be living through a Terminator type of world event in the not too distant future. But I know that there are futurists that have predicted that. Stephen Hawking, for one, predicted that. So in any case, let me just open it up. Anybody have any questions? Please put forth at this point. Let's see.
So I have a quick question, and I see that Mandy has her hand raised as well. I'll just ask.
Thank you.
Yeah. Robert, first of all, this is great, tremendously insightful. I think we need more of these types of conversations, especially in Christian community, to really anticipate with the ways that God is inviting us to be present in culture and in society, and to steward the opportunities that he's given to us on a global scale. So thank you so much for doing the heavy lifting and bringing this kind of information to us. So this kind of segues to my second question, which is not so specific to any one of the points that you've shared, but I'm wondering, do you or any of your colleagues provide, or have you thought about providing some kind of cohort experience where you might invite, I don't know, in groups of 5 or 6 people to get together to really wrestle with the application of the implications of the data that you've just shared? Are there any kind of opportunities along those lines?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I appreciate your encouragement. And like I said at the beginning, I'm an enthusiastic amateur, so I enjoy this the subject certainly. I've not thought about that actually. This is something I prepared for, as Bill mentioned, for the Christian Leadership Alliance conference last year, and I've not kind of thought about the next iteration of that. But Bill, it's certainly a interesting topic for future discussion in the context of fusion, and how we might bring people together who have an interest in these topics, and talk about what the implications are.
Yeah, certainly. If there are specific individuals that like to carry that conversation further, I know many of us are involved in various ministries that are that extend internationally. I know that you, Mark, you've got a number of things going on in Africa, and you shared some really interesting information, Robert, about the growth in Africa from a demographic perspective, and yeah, so and there's lots of implications. So there's lots of different ministries that are going on in Africa. So yeah, there's definitely impact there. So if there are people who are interested in furthering the conversation, and we can certainly create a splinter group that just focuses on meaningful discussion in that arena. If that's the case, feel free to contact me and I can help coordinate that. Yeah, I think those are great opportunities.
Bill, I think Mandy had a question, or her hand.
Yes, Mandy.
Yes, hi. How are you, Robert? Great to see you. You look fantastic as always. I feel like you never age. So my question is, I know you talked about the demographics as far as the trends on the income, because I know you said discretionary income would increase in the global middle class. And then you also talked about the millennials, obviously their wealth increasing. Was that the same trend, or was that something different? Is it middle class and the millennials? I just want to make sure that I took the correct notes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Thank you.
I'm glad that you were on the call, because I was preparing to call out your organization, so the Dale Carnegie organization. So I'm glad.
Oh yes, I was ready. I actually was going to answer you, and I told everybody earlier I have a shower door being put up behind me, so I have to be really mindful. That's why you have my picture today. Otherwise, I'd be on live. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. We're in over 90 countries and over 35 different languages, and we're growing. So we were already in China and in Korea, South Korea, and Africa. Yeah. So there's a lot of, but we're building more offices, more more offices are opening up in those countries. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think you guys are on the forefront of that. And even for some of us, I know there are some independent consultants and folks that do different types of coaching and that sort of activity. I think there's a huge, huge thirst for that
Yes,
overseas, and an
you're right.
opportunity for us as the middle class grows. To your question, Mandy, those are two different statistics, but it's interesting you put those two things together. The first is around sort of just income growth opportunities among folks and people in developing nations. And as the country's GDP grows and there's as consumer spending grows, they're going to see also increasing income opportunities and increasing discretionary income. The issue around wealth transfer is a different source, but that 25 trillion, I think that's the number, statistic is really a US focus number. I believe that's the case. And so that was primarily a US perspective. Anyway, so the short answer to your question is that there are two different topics, two different issues.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much for the clarification. Again, I'm a huge fan. You know I am. So thank you so much, Robert.
Yeah. And I'm a huge fan of yours too, Mandy.
God bless you, my friend.
Thank you.
Other questions?
A question. Good to see you, Robert, and thanks for sharing everything today. That was really insightful. Two of the trends you mentioned kind of caught my attention. So you have the rise of the gig economy and freelancing workers, and then you also have this tendency of population moving from rural areas to cities. Do you see there ever being a tipping point in the future where that starts to turn around, where remote work, internet, even virtual reality advances to a point where, not that there's not a need for a city, but that need of being in person becomes less and you start to see people move out again?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Andrew. One that I didn't have really time to unpack today. First of all, my friend Andrew, if you don't all know, he's really at the forefront of this issue of leveraging technology to provide insight into the nonprofit community, especially around identifying capacity and the word escapes me right now, but the inclination of donors to bond with certain organizations' missions. So real fascinating work. And I think, Andrew, the work that you're doing is on the cutting edge there. To your question, I do think the COVID pandemic and what we've seen recently in terms of remote work and the adoption of remote work, not just in the US, around the world, is going to have an impact on that issue around urbanization. I think in developing economies, because of the challenges and infrastructure, you're still going to see that migration to metropolitan areas. But I think that growth may occur more in suburban areas as opposed to the centers of the cities. And so I know out here in Atlanta, I imagine you're seeing this around the country as well, significant growth in suburban areas. I think that will continue. But the question for me around developing economies is whether there's enough infrastructure to support consistent remote work in those countries. And to the extent there is, you may see similar patterns, but otherwise I think you'll see that primarily in suburban areas outside of metropolitan areas.
Awesome, thanks. That's helpful, and maybe Elon Musk's Starlink rockets will help with some of that infrastructure.
For sure, yeah.
Hey, Robert, I have a question regarding demographics. Now, I've heard people comment that, hey, this world is overpopulated anyways. So this whole decline in population, I could see the negative impact for smaller cultures, smaller tribes, like them kind of disappearing overall. But, for an average country, large country, I mean, is that something that we need to be concerned about? Or is it merely that the population is going to shift and the focus, how we interact with culture, is going to shift because of the generational difference? Because you also mentioned, people are living longer. So, but, it kind of balances out a little bit. I understand it's going to be on decline, but is that decline something negative we need to be watching out for, or is this just a generational population shift of some sort to be aware
Yeah,
of?
I think that's a great question. And I, honestly, I myself have just started to think about the implications of a declining global population. There's so many. It's just, I can't begin to get my arms around that, you know. But the reality is it's going to happen because of how developing economies are growing. And when economies develop, the birth rate drops and the life expectancy grows. I think your question about disappearing tribes is an interesting one. Less developed cultures tend to have more children. So I don't think those are going to be the areas that you have declined, other than folks from those tribes moving away and being assimilated into kind of larger populations. But I think there are interesting implications for climate change. There are interesting implications for, again, urbanization, for infrastructure, when we kind of live in a society where, you know, I think our great-grandchildren will grow up in a world where population growth is not a reality. You know, they're going to live in a world where population is decline, and they'll be grappling with that. I think the more near-term implications are the one that we're seeing, which is how does society take care of a growing, increasing older population? And that will become even more true as a global population declines.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Robert. Thank you so much for your presentation. I have one quick question. Do you see any particular type of industry that get impact more than others with this changes?
Wow. You know, I don't think I could call one out, Chris. I think the topics that we've talked about are broad enough that it impacts everyone. I think if there's a population I'd be most concerned about, especially over the next 10 years, are workers that aren't able to adapt to job changes or loss because of you know, because of the replacement of their work with technology. And so I think those job training, job transition areas are going to be pretty significant. But I do think that almost every industry and every business is going to be impacted by the things that we talked about today.
Thank you.
Sure. Bill, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, we're a little after 1:30 at this point, so I'd like to thank Robert for his time. I'd like to end us in prayer, but I thank everybody for being on this session. I think it was tremendously insightful, a lot of information to think about. Again, for others who'd like to chew on this a little bit more and doing it in conjunction in a context of a smaller group that like to really go further in terms of how it may impact them, their organizations, yeah, feel free to contact me. We can start a separate Zoom group just to discuss that. It could be just a one-shot deal, it could be multiple sessions, but we're here to provide that platform for you to have meaningful conversations and to take things that people have shared to go further in terms of application. So with that, again, you will be receiving the PowerPoints, you have the handouts, and I encourage you to look to our future events. You guys will be on our email distribution list, and I thank you for your participation. So let's close in prayer. Father, I thank you, Father, for just all this information that our brother Robert's really downloaded to us. We thank you, Father, for in the midst of all these different things that have to do with our population and humankind, that even with all these trends, you are in the midst of that. You are sovereign in all these things. And we know, Lord, that as long as we keep our focus upon you, that even though all these things may impact us, may change, that you are our anchor in the midst of all this. And we just continue to lean on you for guidance and wisdom and discernment, and that you would help us adapt to the things that are about to come. We thank you, Father, for this time and for this fellowship. We pray in your Son's name. Amen. All right. Thank you, everyone.